Shalom from the Holy Land. When you walk around Israel, you meet the most interesting people. I just had lunch in a restaurant. I ran into a candidate from Ohio who's running for Senate, and his name is J.D. Vance. And just 2 days ago, I ran into the mayor of the city of Miami Beach. And it's important, especially that political candidates come here to Israel. In this week's Torah portion, we read about the 5 daughters of a man by the name of Tzlavchad. Tzlavchad died and left over 5 daughters, and according to the biblical laws of inheritance, daughters do not inherit their father, only sons. So they came to Moshe, to Moses, and they said, it's not fair. Just because our father had no sons, should we not get his portion in the land of Israel? And Moshe immediately says, let me speak to God. And God says they're right, they're correct, they're justified, they deserve an equal portion in the land of Israel, which they actually receive. And one of the questions is, why does Moshe have to ask God immediately? Why doesn't he try to use his own logic to discern whether their claim is justified? Why doesn't he give it any thought on his own? And the answer is that when the daughters of Tzlavchad come, they say that our father died without any sons, and he was not a part of the rebellion of Korach. The minute they flattered Moses by saying, he was not one of those bad guys who rebelled against you, Moses disqualified himself. Why? Because he said, now I'm biased, I'm tainted by the fact that their father did not participate in the rebellion of Korach against my leadership. Now, if Moses, the greatest leader ever, the man of truth and law, had to recuse himself because maybe the words of the daughters of Tzlavchad would influence his judgment, how much more so ordinary human beings like us? And therefore, when people sit in America, especially news outlets and critics and pundits, and they judge and criticize Israel from afar, and especially when they say such terrible things that Israel's an apartheid state, without ever coming and seeing for themselves the facts, the realities on the ground, how could they judge from afar? Surely they're biased, they're motivated by other political agendas. And therefore we always have to realize that we have to be objective and truthful. But there's another beautiful lesson our rabbis tell us about the daughters of Tzlavchad. When we learn about their daughters of Tzlavchad, it says their lineage traces back to Joseph. Why Joseph? Because Joseph loved the land of Israel, and they were motivated not by monetary concerns of inheritance, but by a love for the land of Israel. And that's why it's traced to Joseph, because Joseph requested that his remains be buried in Israel, and indeed they're buried in Shechem, the territory that Jacob promised to Joseph. And we got to see the tomb of Joseph on this trip. And when Moses says, why does Joseph get to go to the land of Israel and I don't? God says to Moses, when Joseph was in prison in Egypt, he always identifies himself to the butler and to the baker and to Pharaoh, when he's summoned before Pharaoh to interpret his dreams, that I'm a Jewish boy from the land of the Hebrews, from the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. Because he loved Israel in his lifetime, he merited to be buried there. As opposed to Moses, that when he ran away to Midian and he met the daughters of Jethro, he said, they came home and said to their father, we met an Egyptian man. He did not identify himself as a Hebrew. And that's something very beautiful that you see in the land of Israel. One of the things that Americans can learn from Israelis is how to love their country, how to love their land. And really you can't fault Americans because they've never experienced what we as a Jewish people have experienced. We are the true nation state. We are indigenous to this state. This is our national homeland. Going back for thousands of years, we could walk the footsteps of our ancestors all the way back to the patriarchs and the matriarchs. And unlike Americans, we experience collectively the pain and the suffering of exile, the trauma, the Holocaust, the persecutions, the oppression, the inquisitions, the pogroms. And therefore we love this land and appreciate this land like no other nation appreciates their land. Yesterday, we went to the Palmach Museum, where we learned about the early fighters from 1941 to 49 who helped establish the state of Israel before there was even a Tzahal, a Tzva Haganah Yisrael, Israel Defense Forces. And as we left the incredible museum, we were walking by the cafe and we saw a group of elderly people having lunch. And our tour guide said, you know who these people are? They're all former members of Palmach, and they come here to have lunch together every once in a while to share memories. And there are very few of them remaining because they're all in their 90s. And we got to talk to them, and especially one particular woman by the name of Rivka Kramer, and to see their joy, to see the land of Israel, that they know they sacrificed so much. Over 1,000 Palmach members died in the establishment of the state of Israel. To see the nachas that they get, to see how their efforts bore such beautiful fruit of a thriving nation with over 9 million citizens, when at the time of the establishment it was less than 500,000, they could look back and they could look forward and say, look at what the gift that we have given the land of Israel, and we can treasure this gift, knowing, as the museum says, that this is the land that was given to us